All right, today I'm here with Alex, and we're going to briefly talk about what the average homeowner can do in October, November to get his trees, her trees ready to flower and fruit and be prepared for season. So whatever Alex has to say, let's learn.
Okay, so this point in the year, optimally speaking, we want our mango trees to be going dormant. So they've probably spent the last several months either maturing their fruit and then flushing growth, or if they didn't have any fruit, they probably spent most of the year flushing growth. And now, as we approach the later part, we get into fall and get closer to winter, we want our trees to go dormant. That means that they calm down, they stop flushing growth, and they start to mature those stems and leaves that they made in the prior months. Now, here in South Florida, right now, we had a pretty wet September and early part of October. So we got a lot of rainfall here, and it caused or triggered a lot of growth flushes on the trees, perhaps a little later than we would have desired. So some of the trees around me here, particularly these younger trees, I say younger, these trees here are less than 10 years of age, have new growth either emerging or they just recently hardened off that new growth. Like this tree here, you can see the light color on this leaf and stem are indicative of recent growth flush. So we want these trees to calm down, and the only things that we can do that are within our control are to withhold irrigation. We don't want to water the trees at this point in time. Really, we only need to water them when the fruit's developing, but that's a different story. And we don't want to be pruning them at this point. So we usually recommend to people that they do all their pruning by the month of August, because if we cut these trees at this point in time, it's going to excite a response of trying to regenerate canopy by flushing vegetative growth.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
If the tree is, say, young and we don't really want it to fruit, I know you kind of have a 5x5 rule that you go by. You would kind of like your trees 5 feet high, 5 feet wide before you want it to fruit. And so if I have some trees that are too small to fruit, would it be okay to go ahead and trim and tip those right now?
If we're expecting the tree to fruit next year, no. It's too late now. Can you do it and it might still fruit? Yes, but it's a probabilities question, and we want to give the highest possible chance to the tree to flower and fruit the coming year. So a tree that size, it's physically ready to hold on to fruit for sure. We really shouldn't be pruning it at this point. We shouldn't be watering it, and probably should not be applying any nitrogen fertilizer either, although at that size we've usually already completely cut that out. So the best things you can do at this stage is to try to influence the coming crop. Giving the tree potassium is usually very beneficial in the fall, because our trees here in Florida usually start flowering either by the months of December or January, sometimes later given the more mild recent winters. But any potassium that you apply to the tree now is going to take a little bit of time to get absorbed up into the tissues of the tree and into the canopy, but it should stay within the canopy for a period of months, enough that it will influence the bloom. It's not going to make the tree flower, but when the tree hopefully flowers, it should result in better fruit retention and set and quality, and then a second application made in the fruit development period in the spring helps affect the final quality of the fruit. But those are some things you can do, or rather withhold from your tree, to help encourage it to respond to the bloom stimulus that we'll hopefully be receiving in the next few months. Now here in West Palm Beach, we already have some trees flowering. The Edward trees up over here have some bloom coming out of them already, and we have a number of other varieties like Rosy Gold and Rosa that already have bloom emerging out from them. And that's partially a response to a slight change in temperature, but actually we think here possibly a response to the change in photo period as the days start to grow shorter and there's less daylight. It does have some impact on certain varieties, but what we're really waiting for is extended cold fronts that will hopefully show up, maybe in the month of December, possibly later, that will ignite the big bloom that brings us the winter.
I'm going to ask a slightly different. I saw a prediction from the weatherman that says here in Florida or South Florida, they predict a slightly colder than average winter. How do you think that's going to affect us overall in terms of flowering or production? And
well, I hope that's true, and if it turns out to be true, it should result in a decent bloom occurring at some point in the coming year, in January or February, most likely, and possibly an earlier season if the cool weather arrives earlier. But the thing is, we had a very large crop in South Florida, and actually in most of Florida this year for mango, and a lot of times after a large crop like that, it can reduce the likelihood of seeing a large crop the following season, especially if you don't get a strong bloom during the winter period. Well, if we get a nice cool winter, that can mean that we get back-to-back good crops for the trees. It's a possibility. So I really hope, I welcome cold temperature. I don't want freezing temperature. and to be truthful, we could get an optimal amount of cold weather down here in South Florida, Southeast Florida, where we're getting multiple weeks where the temperature's dropping into the 50s, 40s at night, and the folks up in Central Florida or West Florida could see colder temperatures than that result in maybe a few freezing nights during that stretch, and it can ruin their season. So what I'm hoping for here might be less optimal for the middle part of the state, but hopefully for you folks that are in Central Florida or West Florida or interior sections that get a lot colder than we do by the coast, hopefully you don't see any freezing temperature. They can tolerate temperatures, in the mid or upper 30s, okay, but you don't want too much of that, and you certainly don't want the temperatures going to freezing, because that's going to be destructive to the trees, your blossoms, and your fruit. So
we're gonna go over and look at this tree for a second. We're gonna talk about this bloom. Not really bloom, but new growth. That was a poor word to use. So, sorry, back it up. All right, so here on this tree, what tree is this, by the way?
this is a Jakarta.
Jakarta. And so on this one, you have some new flushes coming out.
Yes.
Do you, and here we are, this is October 18th. And do you expect this tree to settle down by the, say, enough to flower for you?
I would say with a tree like this, okay, especially as growth is still emerging and it's probably going to be just hardening off in November, it's a coin flip as to whether this will flower. And it's possible that, and we've seen this before, where stems that are a little more aged, like, you know, this is just coming out, but this is hardened off already. Sometimes what you'll see is if we get a cold front that rolls through in December, this ends up flowering, and this part that's just more recently hardened off its growth doesn't do anything and just sits there until maybe March or something, and then hopefully by that point we're still receiving enough cold weather to ignite a bloom off of this younger stem. But yeah, it's not desirable for me to have growth coming out of this tree. This is not a particularly old tree.
Right.
This was planted since 2018 or something. I don't remember what year exactly we planted this, but we had to replace our previous Jakarta tree. And I've clipped a lot of budwood off of this tree as well, so I pruned it kind of late, if you will, not intentionally, like I wasn't trying to control the tree's size and shape. I was just taking budwood off for our nursery. So I had to take quite a bit of budwood off of this relatively young tree, and doing that in the month of September can trigger a growth response from the tree. So I probably didn't help it in that regard, but I don't really care that much if this tree fruits or not this coming year. I'd like it to, but it's more important as a source of budwood for us because of our nursery and our budwood program and so forth. So optimally, this wouldn't be happening right now.
And so, well, you mentioned putting on, what was it, phosphorus, you said?
Potassium.
Potassium, sorry. And so what would somebody do? Look for like a 0020 or 22 to throw down?
Yeah, you can use that.
ground?
I like 0050 because the concentration's higher,
Right.
and I don't have to apply as much of it to achieve the same result.
Okay.
But yeah, you want to broadcast that underneath the canopy of the tree. You don't want it resting up against the trunk, but underneath the drip line and the surface area that's covered by the leaves on the soil.
And Well, I was gonna say, I know like that's something that's hard to find. I don't think Home Depot has anything
No,
like
but you
that.
can get it from ag supply shops, and
Yeah.
actually there's
SiteOne,
suppliers on the internet that will ship it to you.
Yep.
So, but they're here locally in Palm Beach County. We have several companies that do sell that kind of fertilizer. It is organic if you're concerned about that sort of thing, or at least they have organic formulations of it. So I think it's pretty beneficial for us here in Florida because our soil is often deficient in potassium. It's a very common deficiency in South Florida soils. So, and it's important for fruit development.
Fantastic. Anything else that the general sort of average guy who's got 1 or 5 trees might need to know or think about here as we're wrapping up towards the end of October, you know, letting those trees kind of get ready to hopefully
other
flower
than
for us?
withholding pruning, withholding nitrogen fertilizer, and withholding irrigation, just to monitor their trees, it's important to come out, look at your trees at least on a weekly basis, and preferably a daily basis, and monitor them, because once you get into December and beyond, you're expecting at some point that they're going to flower, and you want to be prepared for that event when it comes so that you can control powdery mildew, control anthracnose if necessary, and that sort of thing. So definitely be monitoring your trees, especially more frequently as you get deeper into winter. So keep an eye on them. And that's what I can think of at the moment in terms of things that a person should be doing with their trees in the fall, their mango trees.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time today. And if you have any questions, email you or...
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So right there is Alex's Edward tree. You can see the blooms up high there, and it is flowering. He's ready.